She told me 5 days. Maybe 6 if her flight got delayed. Then she'd be gone and my apartment would go back to being two grown men arguing about whose turn it was to buy paper towels. That was 4 months ago. She's still on that couch, and somewhere around week 3, I stopped counting the days until she left and started dreading the one when she finally would. My name is Miles Ashford. I'm 33. I edit video for a living, mostly corporate training modules and the occasional wedding highlight reel, which means I spend my days in headphones in a converted closet my roommate generously calls the studio. My life, before all this, ran on a schedule so quiet it barely counted as a life. Find job, find apartment, find routines. I'd been single almost 2 years, ever since a relationship with a woman named Sienna ended not with a fight, but with a slow, mutual shrug, the kind of breakup so undramatic that people kept asking how things were going between us for months after it was already over. I lived with my college friend Desmond Cole, a guy who worked nights in network security and treated the thermostat like it owed him money personally. Between the two of us, the apartment ran on low-maintenance bachelor logic. Dishes got done eventually. Bills got split, mostly on time. Nobody asked too many questions about anybody's evenings, and that suited me fine. Then one Tuesday night in early spring, Desmond came home from the airport dragging a suitcase that wasn't his, trailed by a woman I'd never seen before, laughing at something on her phone like she already lived there. "Miles," Desmond said, dropping his keys on the counter like this was a completely ordinary Tuesday. "This is my sister, Harper." "Harper, this is Miles, the guy who never labels his leftovers." "I know what I made," I said. "Labels are for people with bad memories." Harper Cole looked up from her phone and gave me a smile that made the kitchen feel a size smaller. She was maybe 29, dark hair pulled into a knot that looked accidental but definitely wasn't, wearing an oversized cardigan that had clearly belonged to someone else at some point in its life, standing in a stranger's kitchen at 11 at night like she owned the deed to the building. "He also apparently hides the good snacks," she said. I heard that from the hallway. That was a private conversation. Nothing's private with walls this thin. She set her suitcase down, not by the guest room, but beside the couch, which struck me as odd but not worth commenting on that first night. "I'm only here a few days. Des is letting me crash while I sort some things out." Des. Right. Desmond's nickname. Apparently the only one his own sister used, since the rest of us had given up trying to shorten his name years ago out of respect for how much he hated it. "Sort what things out?" I asked, not yet knowing that particular question would take 4 months to fully answer. Harper's smile flickered, dimming half a second before it came back up. "Life things," she said lightly. "Boring things. Don't worry about it." I should have worried about it a little. I didn't, not that first night. I made a joke about the couch cushions being lumpy. She made one about being an expert in worse sleeping arrangements. And I went to bed thinking I'd have a pleasant houseguest for less than a week before life returned to its usual quiet. I had no idea yet that Harper Cole did not operate on anyone's usual schedule, least of all her own. The next morning, I found her already up at 6:30, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders and a mug balanced on one knee, staring at her phone with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not sad exactly. Braced. Like she already knew what the next sentence on the screen would say and was steeling herself for it before it arrived. "You're up early," I said, heading for the coffee maker. "I don't really sleep much these days," she said, not looking up. "Old habit. Bad habit. Most of my good habits retired a few years back. This is what's left of the schedule." She said it like a joke, but there was a groove underneath it, worn smooth from repetition. I let it pass. It wasn't my business yet, or so I told myself. By day 3, the couch had stopped being a temporary inconvenience and started becoming a fixture with its own quiet ecosystem. Harper had a system now. Blanket folded a specific way each morning. Phone charger threaded neatly along the baseboard. A stack of paperbacks growing on the side table like she was building a nest that had no intention of being dismantled soon. Desmond mentioned once, quietly, in the kitchen, that he'd offered her the guest room twice, and she turned it down both times. She likes the couch, he said, like that explained anything at all. Nobody actually likes the couch, Des. I don't know, man. She's dealing with some things. I'm not going to push her about where she sleeps. His jaw had a particular tightness that told me the subject was closed, at least from him, at least for now. So I stopped asking him and started just noticing things instead. The way Harper flinched, almost invisibly, whenever a phone buzzed that wasn't hers. The way she sat facing the door in every room. Some old instinct that hadn't gotten the memo she was safe now. The way her laugh, which came often and easily, sometimes cut itself off half a second too soon, like she'd caught herself enjoying something and needed to check first whether that was allowed. By the end of the first week, 5 days had quietly turned into 7, and nobody said a word about it out loud. I noticed because I'd started doing math I had no business doing, counting how many more mornings I'd walk into the kitchen and find her there already, blanket around her shoulders, hair a disaster, sharp and funny before either of us had finished our first cup of coffee. "You're staring," she said one morning without glancing up from her book. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "Whether you're ever going to explain why a grown woman with, presumably, her own bed somewhere, chooses to sleep on a couch that sounds like a dying accordion every time someone shifts their weight." That earned a real laugh, short and startled. "It does not sound like that." "It absolutely does. I heard it at 3 in the morning last night. I thought we had a possum problem." "Rude." She closed the book, finally looking at me properly. Her eyes were a warm gray-green, the kind that shifted color depending on the light, and in the gray morning glow through the window, they looked almost silver. "Maybe I just like the couch." "Nobody likes the couch, Harper." She was quiet a moment, and I watched her weigh something behind her eyes. Some small private negotiation about how much truth she was willing to hand over before 8 in the morning. "The couch doesn't remind me of anything," she said finally. "That's the whole appeal. It's neutral ground." I didn't push further that day, but I started paying closer attention, the way you do when you've stopped merely being curious about someone and started actually caring what happens to them, even before you've admitted that shift to yourself. 2 weeks in, Desmond left town for a work training, leaving Harper and me alone in the apartment for 4 days. I remember being nervous about that, not in a bad way, more the specific unease of realizing you've been quietly looking forward to something you hadn't given yourself permission to want. The first night, I ordered far too much Thai food on purpose, and we ate it sitting on the floor in front of the TV, because apparently that had become our thing without either of us officially deciding it. She picked the show, something with subtitles I complained about for the first 10 minutes before getting completely pulled in. "You're better at this than you let on," she said around a mouthful of noodles. "At what?" "Being easy to be around." I expected Dessa's roommate to be some guy who leaves protein shaker bottles everywhere and calls everyone bro. "I have a shaker bottle." I saw it. "It's very sad and mostly unused." "New Year's resolution." "It's April." She laughed, and this time the laugh didn't cut off early. It ran its full course, warm and unguarded, and something tightened in my chest, a feeling I recognized but hadn't felt in a long time. I looked away first, because looking at her directly right then felt dangerous, the way staring at something too bright does. "Can I ask you something?" I said, once the show ended and neither of us reached for the remote. "You're going to ask about the couch again." "I am going to ask about the couch again." She sighed, but it wasn't annoyed. More like she'd been waiting for someone to finally ask properly instead of circling around it politely. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, and for a second she looked much younger than 29 and much more tired than anyone that age should look. "I was engaged," she said, 2 years ago. His name was Bennett." I said nothing. Just let the silence hold room for whatever came next. "We were together almost 4 years. He was," she paused, choosing the word carefully, "impressive. On paper. Good job. Good family. The kind of man who remembered to open car doors and made my parents light up every time he walked in the room. Everyone loved him. I loved him too, genuinely, for a long time." "What happened?" Somewhere around year 3, he decided love meant deciding things for me. Small stuff first. Which restaurants we went to. Which friends were good influences. Then bigger things. Which job offers I should consider. Which ones I definitely shouldn't, because they'd take too much attention away from him. Her jaw tightened. By the end, I was calling him before I bought groceries. Not because he asked, but because I'd trained myself to expect the conversation if I didn't call first. It felt normal. That's the part nobody understands from the outside. It didn't feel like a trap while I was inside it. It felt like love with rules attached. How'd it end? I found out he'd been reading my messages for over a year. Nothing dramatic, no hacking. I just never logged out of my laptop, and he never mentioned that he knew everything I'd said to everyone, including things I'd said about him. When I confronted him, he told me I was being paranoid for being upset about it. Said if I had nothing to hide, it shouldn't bother me. She let out a short, humorless laugh. I left 3 weeks later. Slept on my best friend's couch for 2 months while I figured out what an apartment even cost in a city where I'd never once paid a bill on my own. And the couch thing started there, she said quietly. That first couch. Sounds ridiculous, I know, but it was the first place I slept where nobody was tracking what time I came to bed. Nobody had opinions about my posture or my sleep schedule or which side I slept on. It was mine, even though technically it wasn't. Ever since, whenever things get loud in my head, I gravitate toward one. Not because I enjoy being uncomfortable, because it's the version of safe I actually know how to hold on to. I sat with that for a long moment before responding, because it deserved more than a quick reply. That's not ridiculous, I said finally. That might be the smartest thing I've heard all week. Her eyes lifted to mine, surprised, like she'd expected something softer and less honest. Most people just tell me to get therapy and move on. You can do both. Doesn't mean the couch has to stop making sense just because a professional says it should. Something in her face shifted, some wall coming down half an inch, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and faint traffic outside. Why do you ask such careful questions? She said eventually. Des just avoids the topic completely. Most people do. Because I'd rather understand you than be comfortable, I said, and immediately felt like I'd said too much, too plainly, too soon. But she didn't pull back from it. If anything, she leaned in slightly, like the honesty had drawn her closer instead of pushing her away. That's a dangerous thing to say to someone sleeping on your couch, she said softly. Is it working? She smiled, slow and a little helpless. Unfortunately, yes. We didn't kiss that night. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been easy, the kind of easy that turns into regret later if you rush it. Instead, we sat there a while longer, talking about nothing important, and when she finally curled up under her blanket on the couch, I said good night and lay awake a long time thinking about a woman who'd chosen furniture over safety, because safety, for her, had once come with strings attached to every corner of it. The days after that moved differently than any stretch of time I could remember. Harper never officially moved in. Her belongings stayed mostly in that one suitcase, though a toothbrush appeared in the bathroom, then a second mug that became specifically hers, then a small stack of sketchbooks on the coffee table, because it turned out she drew, badly on purpose sometimes, beautifully other times, quick studies of hands and streetlights she never let anyone see finished. Desmond noticed the shift before either of us said a word about it. He caught me once in the kitchen, watching Harper argue cheerfully with a cooking show about a contestant's knife skills, and gave me a look somewhere between amused and protective. You know she's my sister, right? He said quietly. I'm aware. I mean that as both a warning and a permission slip. If you hurt her, I will make our lease renewal extremely inconvenient. But also, she's smiled more since she got here than she has in 2 years. So don't be a coward about it. That landed harder than I expected, because he was right. I'd been circling something for weeks without naming it, telling myself it was too soon, too complicated, that a woman recovering from a relationship built on control shouldn't be rushed into anything, even something gentle. All of that was true. It was also, if I was honest, partly an excuse to avoid the vulnerability of saying what I actually felt out loud. Around the 6-week mark, something happened that I still think about more than almost anything else from that stretch of time. Harper had a bad night, one of the worst I'd seen. She didn't tell me what triggered it at first, just came out of the bathroom pale, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared at the wall like she was trying to remember how to breathe on purpose. "Harper," I said, crouching in front of her. "Talk to me." "I found an old email thread," she said finally, voice thin. "Sent it to my mother. From back when we were together. He was asking her for advice on how to get me to, and I'm quoting, stop being so difficult about wanting a career. My own mother. Suggesting he limit my hours at the gallery I used to work part-time for. Like I was a schedule to be optimized. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat down next to her, close enough that our knees touched, and let her finish shaking before I offered any words. "I used to think my mother just didn't understand ambition," Harper said eventually. "Turns out she understood it fine. She just decided Bennett's comfort mattered more than mine." "That's not on you," I said. "None of that was ever on you. I know that logically." She wiped at her eyes, annoyed at herself for crying. "It's the part underneath the logic that takes longer to catch up. Can I tell you something?" I asked. She nodded, still not quite looking at me. "My ex, Sienna. We didn't end because of anything dramatic. We ended because somewhere along the way I stopped noticing whether I actually wanted the life we were building or whether I was just going along with it, because leaving felt harder than staying. When it finally ended, I told myself I was fine. And I was, in the sense that nothing was actively wrong. But it took me a long time to realize fine isn't the same as good. I think you're allowed to grieve something that looked correct on paper and still wasn't right." She looked at me then, something loosening in her expression. "That's the first time anyone's put it that way to me. Everyone else wants a villain they can point at. Bennett was one, obviously, but my mother wasn't a villain. She was just tired and scared and picked the easier story. Doesn't mean it didn't cost you something." "No," she agreed quietly. "It cost me a lot." We sat there a while longer, not talking, just present in the same space, and something about that night. Not a confession, not a kiss, just two people sitting quietly with something painful between them. Felt like it mattered more than most of the big moments that came after. By the end of the first month, 5 days had become something neither of us mentioned anymore, an unspoken agreement that the timeline had simply dissolved. Desmond stopped bringing it up too, mostly because it had become obvious to everyone in the apartment, including apparently the mail carrier, who'd started addressing packages to Harper C. at our address without anyone asking her to update anything formally. The moment that finally cracked things fully open happened on an unremarkable Thursday. Nothing special about the date, nothing planned. Harper got a call that afternoon that visibly rattled her, and by the time I got home from a client meeting, she was sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up, staring at nothing, blanket pulled tight around her shoulders even though the apartment wasn't cold. "Hey," I said carefully, setting my bag down. "What happened?" "Bennett called," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone holding something together through sheer effort. "First time in over a year. He heard from a mutual friend that I'm doing well." Apparently that bothered him. "What did he say?" "That he's been thinking about me. That he made mistakes but never stopped caring. That he heard I was staying with my brother and his roommate and wanted to make sure I wasn't," quoting directly, "letting some rebound situation confuse me about what real commitment looks like." My jaw tightened without permission. "He called to insult the people taking care of you. He called to remind me I used to need him," she said quietly. "That's always been his specialty, making me doubt whatever peace I managed to build without him standing in the middle of it." I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, and for a moment neither of us said anything. "Can I say something that might be out of line?" I asked. "When has that ever stopped you before?" "Fair point. I think you've built more peace in a few months on my couch than he built in 4 years of a relationship that came with a rulebook. And I think some part of him knows exactly that, which is precisely why he called." Her eyes came up to mine, glassy but not quite spilling over. "You actually believe that? I watch you every day, Harper." I've watched you go from flinching at every buzzing phone to laughing at bad cooking competitions without checking the door first. That's not rebound energy. That's you, coming back to yourself, one ordinary evening at a time. Her breath caught, just slightly. Why does that mean so much, coming from you specifically? There it was, the question I'd been avoiding even inside my own head for weeks. I could have deflected, made a joke the way I usually did when things got too honest too fast. Instead, I looked at her directly and let myself say the true thing. Because somewhere in the last couple of months, watching you rebuild became the best part of my day. And I've been telling myself it wasn't my place to say that. Because you're healing, because your brother would probably threaten my kneecaps, because it felt too soon. But sitting here right now, watching you brace for a call from a man who spent years trying to make you smaller, I don't want to be careful anymore. Whatever this is, on my end, it's not rebound anything. It's just you. Harper stared at me a long beat, and I watched something in her expression crack open, not painfully this time. More like a window finally letting in air after being sealed too long. I've been sleeping on your couch for weeks, she said softly, partly because it felt safe, and partly because some stubborn part of me didn't want to admit I was staying because of you, not the furniture. That's either the nicest or most alarming thing anyone said about my couch. She laughed, wet and surprised, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Don't ruin the moment. Sorry. Continue. I like you, Miles. I think I've liked you since around week 2, somewhere around the point you started leaving the good coffee out specifically because you noticed I preferred it over the cheap stuff. I just didn't trust myself to know the difference between real feeling and gratitude for basic decency, not after Bennett. I needed to be sure it wasn't relief talking. And now? Now I think it's just you talking. Only you. I reached over slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. She didn't move away. If anything, she leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering closed for half a second, like she'd been waiting a long time to be touched gently by someone not asking for anything in return. Can I kiss you? I asked quietly. You're asking permission? After weeks of very obvious tension? I told you. I'd rather understand you than rush you. Her smile was soft, a little wrecked, entirely real. Yes. Please, before I lose my nerve and pretend I only meant this platonically. So I kissed her, careful at first, the way you touch something you're not sure is fragile, and then not careful at all once it was clear she was kissing me back with the same certainty. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing unsteady, smiling in a way I hadn't seen from her before, entirely unguarded. Well, she whispered, that's going to make sharing a couch complicated. You could always try the guest room now. Absolutely not. I've grown attached to the sound it makes. Very possum-like. Comforting, in its own strange way. I laughed, and for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, my apartment finally felt like it had exactly the right number of people in it. Desmond came home 2 hours later to find us on the couch together, my arm around Harper's shoulders, a cooking show playing quietly that neither of us was actually watching. He stopped in the doorway, looked at us for a long moment, and nodded slowly, like a man confirming a theory he'd been running for weeks. Finally, he said, dropping his keys on the counter, I was about to start charging you rent for emotional tension, Miles. It was taking up real square footage. Don't be smug, Des, Harper said, but she was smiling. I get to be a little smug. I did bring her home in the first place. He grabbed a water bottle from the fridge and paused, looking at his sister with something softer under the teasing. You good? I'm good, she said, and I watched her mean it in a way that felt entirely different from the careful, performative good she used to offer people who asked. Really good, actually. That should have been the end of the hard part. It wasn't, not quite. A few weeks later, Bennett showed up at the apartment uninvited, having gotten the address from a mutual friend who apparently didn't understand boundaries any better than he did. It was a Saturday afternoon. Harper was in the kitchen, halfway through explaining why her sketch of the skyline had one building drawn intentionally crooked, when the buzzer went off. I checked the intercom camera out of habit, and my stomach dropped seeing a man in an expensive coat standing in the lobby, hands in his pockets, looking up at the camera like he already owned whatever was on the other side of it. "Harper," I said carefully, "someone's downstairs asking for you." Tall, silver watch. Looks like he practices his smile in a mirror. Her face went pale, then hard, in that order. "Bennett, you don't have to see him." "No," she said, straightening her shoulders in a way that reminded me of the very first morning I'd met her, that instinctive readiness for a fight she hadn't asked for. "I think I do. If I don't, he'll just keep showing up thinking I'm avoiding him out of weakness instead of choice. I'm coming with you, Miles, not to fight your battles, to stand next to you while you fight them, if that's what you want. Your call." She looked at me a long moment, something grateful moving behind her eyes, and nodded once. "Okay, stay close." We buzzed him up. Bennett walked in looking exactly like a man who'd rehearsed the entrance, coat immaculate, expression arranged into something between concern and condescension. He glanced at me first, sizing me up with the particular contempt of someone used to being the most impressive man in any room, then turned his full attention to Harper. "You look well," he said, like it pained him slightly to admit it. "Better than I expected. What are you doing here, Bennett?" "I wanted to see for myself." "You wouldn't return my calls." "Because I don't owe you calls anymore." His jaw tightened, the polish cracking at the edges. "I heard you're staying with your brother's roommate." "Sleeping on his couch, apparently, which, forgive me, sounds less like healing and more like a woman who hasn't figured out how to stand on her own without leaning on the nearest available man." The words landed exactly the way he intended them to, sharp and precise, aimed at the softest part of her old wounds. My hands curled into fists at my sides, but I stayed quiet, because this wasn't my fight to lead, only to stand beside. Harper's expression didn't crack. If anything, something steadier settled into it. "You know what's funny, Bennett?" she said. "I've slept on that couch for months, and it's the first place I've felt genuinely safe in over 2 years. Not because a man was managing every part of my life for me, because nobody there has ever once made me feel small enough that furniture felt like an upgrade from my own bedroom." His face flushed. "That's not fair." "No," she said calmly. "What wasn't fair was reading my private messages for a year and calling me paranoid when I found out. What wasn't fair was making every decision I made feel like it required your approval first. I'm not confused about what real commitment looks like, Bennett. I finally know exactly what it looks like, because it doesn't resemble anything you ever gave me." I watched him absorb that, watched the practiced charm slip further, revealing something colder underneath. His eyes flicked to me. "And you," he said, "you do know she's not exactly available for anything stable right now. She's a project, not a partner. You'll figure that out eventually." Something in me went very still and very calm, the way it does when anger stops being loud and becomes precise instead. "She's not a project," I said. "She's a person who spent 4 years being managed by someone who mistook control for love. And every day since she's been in my life, she's shown me exactly how much strength it takes to walk away from that and rebuild from nothing. So no, I don't think I'll be figuring out anything you're implying. I think I'll just keep showing up. That's usually the difference between people like you and people like me." Bennett's mouth opened, then closed, clearly unused to being spoken to without deference. For a moment nobody said anything, the apartment holding its breath. "This is embarrassing," he finally said, straightening his coat like that could restore some dignity to the moment. "Yes," Harper agreed evenly. "For you." He left without another word, the door closing behind him with more force than necessary, and the apartment exhaled all at once. Harper stood there a second, then let out a long, shaky breath and turned to me, disbelief and relief mixed together on her face. "I've imagined that conversation for 2 years," she said. "It never went that well in my head." "You didn't need me for any of it," I said. "You had it handled." "I know. But it helped, having you there. Not fighting for me, just being solid next to me while I did it myself." She stepped closer, resting her forehead against my shoulder. "That's new. Bennett used to fight my battles for me in ways that made me feel smaller, like I needed rescuing. You just stood there and let me be strong. That's the whole difference, I said quietly. I don't need you to need me. I just like being where you are. She looked up at me then, eyes bright, and kissed me slowly, like she was sealing something rather than starting it. Life settled after that. The good kind of settled, not the flat, avoidant kind I'd mistaken for peace before Harper ever walked through that door. A few weeks later, though, something else happened that neither of us saw coming. Harper's mother called, the same mother from the old email thread, the one who'd once quietly sided with Bennett's version of what a good partner should look like. Harper took the call in the bedroom with the door mostly closed, and I stayed in the kitchen, giving her space, though I could hear the shape of it, even if not every word. When she came out 20 minutes later, her eyes were red, but her expression was calm in a way that told me something had shifted rather than broken. She apologized, Harper said, sitting down at the counter across from me. Actually apologized. Said she'd been scared of losing the version of stability Bennett represented in the family, and that fear made her choose the wrong side, without fully realizing she was choosing it all. How do you feel about that? Surprised mostly, and cautiously glad. It doesn't erase anything, but it's a start. She looked at me for a long moment. She asked about you, actually, whether the roommate's roommate was, and I'm quoting her exact words, someone serious or someone convenient. What did you tell her? I told her you were the first person who ever let me be strong without needing me to perform gratitude for it. Harper's mouth curved. She didn't really know what to do with that answer, but I think it landed somewhere. That conversation mattered more than either of us said out loud right then, because it meant the healing wasn't just happening inside our apartment walls. It was starting to ripple outward, into the family that had once, however unintentionally, made her feel like she needed permission to want more. She started looking at apartments of her own not long after that, not to escape the couch, but because independence had become something she wanted to build fully, on solid ground, before combining her life with anyone else's. I respected that more than I could have explained to her at the time. She moved into a small one-bedroom 5 blocks away, close enough that walking over became a daily habit neither of us questioned, far enough that it was unmistakably, entirely hers. Desmond, for his part, never let either of us forget who was responsible for the whole thing. "You're welcome," he'd say at least once a week, completely unprompted, usually while eating cereal directly out of the box at 11 at night. "I brought my sister home for 5 days and single-handedly fixed both your love lives. I should charge a consulting fee." "You barely consulted," I told him once. "You just left us alone in an apartment for 4 days and hoped for the best. That's called strategic matchmaking, Miles. Some people call it luck. I call it vision." Harper, sitting beside me on my couch, which she still visited constantly out of what I'm fairly sure was genuine sentimental attachment, threw a pillow at her brother without even looking up from her sketchbook. "Your vision was going to a training conference and forgetting your phone charger, Des. Don't rewrite history. History is written by the winners," he said, unbothered, and left it at that. A year after that first Tuesday night, the night Desmond dragged a suitcase and a stranger into our kitchen, I asked Harper to move in with me properly, into an apartment we found together, one with no assigned couch corners or leftover history from anyone else's life, just a fresh space that belonged to both of us equally from the start. She said yes before I even finished the sentence, laughing through happy tears, telling me this was the first time in her life a decision about where she lived had felt entirely, uncomplicatedly hers to make, and that she was choosing me not because it was safe, but because it was right. We kept one piece of furniture from the old apartment for old time's sake, an ugly, slightly creaky secondhand couch that Desmond insisted on gifting us with far too much ceremony, wrapped in a bow like a joke that was also, somehow, completely sincere. It sits in our living room now, mismatched with everything else we own, and every so often, on a bad night or a good one, Harper curls up on it out of habit, and I sit down beside her, and we don't talk about why. We just are there, together, which is the whole point. 2 years after that first Tuesday, I proposed to her in that same apartment, On that same ridiculous couch. No elaborate plans, no crowd, no speeches. Just the two of us on a rainy Sunday afternoon, and me finally saying the thing I'd been circling since that Thursday when she told me about a phone call that tried to make her small again and failed completely. I don't want to be the guy who just happened to have a spare couch, I told her, ring in hand, heart somewhere in my throat. I want to be the choice you make every single day after this one, on purpose, the same way you chose to leave what wasn't good for you and build something entirely your own instead. Marry me, Harper. She cried, then laughed, then said yes so fast I barely got the ring on before she was kissing me. And later that night, curled up against me on that same creaky secondhand couch, she told me Bennett had once said she'd never find anyone who valued her without needing to control her, and that some part of her had believed him for longer than she wanted to admit. He was wrong about a lot of things, I told her. That was just the biggest one. We got married the following spring, small ceremony, close friends. Desmond giving a best man speech so unbearably smug about being the original architect of our entire relationship that half the room was in tears from laughing before the sentimental part even started. Harper's parents came, her mother a little quieter than usual, watching her daughter with an expression that looked like slow, careful pride finally catching up to years of misplaced fear. Bennett, as far as I know, moved to another city not long after that confrontation in our old apartment, and neither of us has thought about him more than a handful of times since, which felt, in its own quiet way, like the truest victory of all. These days, when people ask how we met, Harper usually starts with, "My brother brought me home like a stray," and I finish with, "and then refuse to let her leave the couch," and somewhere in the explanation that follows, the real story comes out. The one about safety built slowly instead of demanded instantly. About a woman who learned that peace didn't have to come with rules attached. About a man who learned that the best thing he ever did was stop being careful and start being honest. Sometimes late at night, when the apartment is quiet and the couch creaks under both our weight the way it always has, I think about that very first evening, Desmond dragging a suitcase through the door, a woman I'd never met flashing a smile that made the whole kitchen feel different somehow. 5 days, he told me. She'll be gone in 5 days. She never left. Not really. She just found somewhere safe enough to finally stay. So tell me, what would you have done if your roommate's sister showed up for a week and quietly rearranged your entire life without either of you noticing until it was already too late to go back? And have you ever had someone walk into your home expecting to stay briefly, only to realize much later that they were exactly the person you didn't know you were waiting for? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.